Welcome to the Goldmark Gallery. I'm Mike Goldmark, and this is a walkthrough of our latest Rigby Graham exhibition. When Rigby Graham died in 2015, the Sunday Times headlined their obituary, "Irascible painter whose idiosyncratic landscapes are among the 20th century's best." Rig and I had met some 30 years previous, in the mid-1980s. He had taken early retirement. He was in his mid-50s then. He'd taken early retirement from Leicester Polytechnic, where he had been teaching education, a subject about which he said he knew nothing and cared even less. And I was busy building this art gallery. I built the gallery in 1987. At that time, Rigby Graham was the veteran of 42 successive, unsuccessful one-man shows, and the inaugural exhibition in this gallery, his 43rd, we sold more pictures than the 42 previous put together. And after that, we worked together for nearly 3 decades until his death, through thick and thin and often thinner. He died in 2015, and I miss him. Rigby Graham's work covered many aspects, from painting in oils, watercolours, prints, original prints, etchings, lithographs, woodcuts, stained glass. He wrote huge number of book illustrations, postage stamps. There was hardly anything that he didn't do. This exhibition centres mostly on his watercolours and his woodcuts and lithographs. And I'm going to walk you around a little and talk a bit about some of those things. On the wall here are a few of Rigby Graham's watercolours, many more in the catalogue, which hopefully many of you will have, or if you don't have it, you can certainly just let us know and we'll send you a copy, and others on the website. I think the biggest thing which typifies the paintings of Rigby Graham, certainly in the watercolours, is that Graham actually painted what was there. There's a wonderful quote from Francis Spalding. Compared with some of his better known contemporaries, he has 10 times as much to say. It is Graham and not Rowland Hilder to whom historians will turn in future years to find out the look of the late 20th century landscape. Graham painted what was there. What he was doing was looking, and if he taught me anything, and he was quite a hard taskmaster, what he tried to teach me was how to look. I always think one great way of showing that is to look at Rigby Graham's skies. Every sky that Graham painted was different. He sat there and he actually looked at what there was. So many artists have conventions of how they do certain things, not Graham. Graham's convention, if anything, was one of total honesty. He was looking to see what was there. A criticism often levelled at Rigby Graham was that his colours were too bright. English watercolour for, I think possibly about 100 years had been washed out. For Graham, he said that people heard the words watercolour and painted with the water and not with the colour. Not so Rigby Graham. He was painting with the colour. And if you actually take one of his paintings out into the open air where he made them, because all of these paintings were painted outside. You take them out and look, you can see that in fact he struggled sometime to find the intensity of the colour that's actually out there. I wanted to show you the painting that was actually up on this wall just before we started filming, but somebody has just bought it. So if I move across here, I can maybe hold up a few other watercolours that we have that I can show you. See these wonderful, remarkable colours. Sometimes when I sat next to him, watching him paint, I would look at this little paint box that he had perched on his knee with often a bottle of water on the other side, and I would see him mixing what looked to me mucky colour in the paint box, and then as it hit the paper, as the paint hit the paper, there was this amazing zing of brightness. Never understood how he did that. He had a few favourite places where he went to paint a lot. Ireland was a place that he loved dearly, and he painted a lot over there. We commissioned Charles Mapleston to make a film which was something by way of a road movie which stood as a metaphor for his life, and he travelled across Ireland making paintings. He went there very often, and another place that he went a lot was Malta, and never quite understood what it was about Malta and Gozo that he liked so much, but he went over there very often. And in fact, there was a book published full of Rigby Graham paintings of Malta, and there's the book written by Victor Fenwick. And here we have one of the Maltese watercolours that's actually illustrated in the book. And there's another one there. There's that one there. Graham painted what he saw. So there was very often detritus in the foreground, very often barbed wire. Quite often, if you look at a Rigby Graham watercolour, the foreground is difficult to get past. Look, this one here, full of stones and plants and whatever. You can't walk through this. It's as though the path of life is troubled and difficult, and the bit that you want to get to, that you can actually see, you have to get past all this detritus in the foreground. Very often you find in the paintings and prints a black hole that you're drawn to, the black hole of despair. But also you have invariably hope and light past that. So he's showing you both things simultaneously, the whole of life. So here's another painting where it's difficult to get past the foreground. It's prickly and difficult and awkward, but the bits that we really want to get to are further through or up there. In 1990, I got a card from Rigby Graham with his usual humour. He signed it Henry Haggis, and Mike, Shakespeare said it all, a real anticipator he. Tumoro and tumoro and tumoro creeps in this petty pace from day to day. His way of telling me that he had just been diagnosed with cancer. and all our yesterdays have lighted fools the way to dusty death. And he almost immediately made this woodcut. He'd been making woodcuts pretty well since I'd known him. He was very taken by the German expressionists, Carl Schmidt-Rottluff, Erich Heckel, loved the slashing of the wood and made many woodcuts himself, but did it in the most extraordinary way. And I will show you a little example of how that worked. This was a woodcut that he made when he found that he had cancer. He called this woodcut Balloon Race. And here we see a bird standing on this chap's head. Birds, by the way, are a recurrent theme in Graham's work. We see it time and time again, and standing both for life and for death. This chap knows that he's got the bird of death on his head. Here you have telegraph wires and symbolically the 3 crosses of Calvary, although Graham was not a churchgoer, but here were symbolically the 3 crosses of Calvary. And here this man knows that he has the black bird of death on his head, and you can see the fear in his eyes. And this is what we see immediately. And then our eyes are drawn to this little chap down here. He also has the black bird of death on his head, but he doesn't know it yet. But because in everything that Graham did there was balance, here in the sky, these balloons again show hope. And he called this one Balloon Race. When he came out of hospital, having had cancer, he made another woodcut, this one called The Growth. And here we can see an elderly artist. In Graham's case, the growth was in his colon, and in this case, the growth was coming out of the back of his head. If working with Rigby Graham all sounds a little serious, I have to say that it wasn't like that. I don't think either of us would have survived together for 30 years had it not have been for the laughter. He had an extraordinary sense of humour, and I'm not sure that I'll ever forget that. The high-pitched laugh, almost like a hyena that used to tear through the place, and some of the letters that I got. And here's one where postcards and letters constantly. And here's one that I got. Dear Mike, I'm becoming increasingly worried about your continual and growing obsession with exhibiting the work of Rouault, Picasso, Matisse, Chagall, and now Derain. I get the distinct impression that you're letting your gallery go to the frogs. Rigby. I want to tell you a little bit about the difference between a wood engraving and a woodcut. Now, this is a wood engraving, and these were normally done on boxwood, and this is a slice. If that's the tree there, this is a slice through the tree, and the engraving is done into there, and you can pretty well go where you like when you're engraving. There was a travelling exhibition called 20th Century Wood Engraving and a Dissenting Voice. This was by the art historian Hal Bishop, and full of wood engravings and one dissenting voice, and no prizes who the dissenting voice was. Here we have the print for Balloon Race, and here we have one of the wooden blocks which Graham cut. Now this is a piece of mahogany-faced Conti board, and as he said to me, it doesn't like to be cut, and it bites back as he pushes the engraving tool across it, bites back like a rabid dog. Why did he use a medium like this? It was because Graham was constantly looking in everything he did for tension. In his watercolours, he would often sit outside in the pouring rain or in the baking sun, drawing first, sometimes with a pen that he'd made himself out of an old reed, dipping it into the ink bottle, making the drawing first, and then applying the watercolour afterwards, which gave the work tension. And here, using a wood block like this, you've got enormous tension. This is just one block that had to be cut. So he would start by drawing, this is what's called the key block, the first block. So he'd start by drawing the design onto this block. So this was the black block. And the German expressionists cut away when they were using blocks so that the image was made of white line. Graham chose to make life even more difficult for himself, because what he wanted was the image to be black line. So here, for instance, where you see this telegraph pole here, he cut away on both sides, leaving that to print. Any mistake that he made chipping away there, if a bit of that came away, then the whole thing was ruined and he'd have to start again. So having made one block like that, he then made, in this instance, two more blocks, which were going to take the colour. So this block was cut, that black image was transferred, printed onto this so that you could see where he was going and get the registration right. And then he cut this one, and this one was going to take blue, green, brown and grey. And then here we go for block number 3. And when these were printed, they were printed on a press. When he was printing them himself, proofing them, he used what he called his press, which was the back of a spoon, and would then lay the paper on. And these were printed, and each block had to be inked up with each colour by hand, and then printed. And then the next, when that was dry, the next one was printed on top of it. So the register had to be absolutely perfect. So they took an absolute age and cost an awful lot of money to have printed. Here's a Rigby Graham woodcut that I'm particularly fond of. It's, I think, the longest woodcut that he ever made. And the subject is Thomas a Crowan, who was known as the Island Man. He wrote a book. He lived on Great Blasket, which was one of a group of, I think, 7 islands off the coast of Ireland. And at the very most, that community on Great Blasket had only 175 people living on it. And Thomas à Crone lived as a fisherman on there. A book which he wrote called The Island Man had this image on the front, tiny, that big. And it was from that image that Rigby Graham made this particular print. It was printed for us in Wales by a chap called David Esselmont, and it was so long that it was too long for his press. So he had to put it in one end and take an impression, and then take it out and turn it round and put it in the other end and print the other side. And it was an absolute nightmare to print. In 1953, the Irish government decided that it was too difficult to sustain life properly on the island, and so they had it evacuated. This is why you see the helicopter in there, because at difficult times that was the only way that you could get to the island. And here again you have this recurrent theme that you see in Graham's work of the birds, the black ones and the white ones. Birds were a really recurrent theme for Graham. And here, these beautifully observed boots. Absolutely gorgeous. In 2015, now confined to bed, in and out of consciousness, hallucinating, Graham was still making art. Lying in his bed, holding a wood block above his head and slashing at it. And the last thing he did was to make a series of 5 cuts. This is one of them. And here again, you see the birds. And another one in this cut here. And he made work right till the end. In all the time that I knew Rigby Graham and worked with him, I never once heard him describe himself as an artist. In this day and age, it seems to me that almost every second person calls themselves an artist, and therefore whatever they make is art. For Graham, the word didn't mean anything to him. He was either painting, or he was making woodcuts, or he was making lino cuts, or he was making book illustrations, or he was writing, or working and working and working. But the thought of calling himself an artist never occurred to him. And I have to say that sometimes when we travelled together, me in those days often barefooted and wearing very casual clothes, he always in the jacket, shirt and tie. And when we arrived places, they usually got us the wrong way round and thought he was obviously the gallery owner or businessman, and I was the art bloke. Rigby Graham was also an extraordinary exponent of the lino cut, and what he did was, unlike nowadays when so many artists think that the print is just a way of replicating a good painting that they've made, he would pick, depending on the subject matter, he would pick either etching or the lino cut or the woodcut, in order that the process help the finished piece. And the point about the lino cut is that the line is gentler because it's easier to push the engraving tool through the lino. Here's one. He was a great lover of the work of George Stubbs. And here he was with a portrait of Stubbs. And of course, being Graham, he knew and had read all about George Stubbs. He did these beautiful cuts here of the horse, and he of course knew that what Stubbs had done was to hang a horse up and slowly dissect it in order to get down to the skeleton so that he would understand properly how the horse worked. And Graham immediately thought, my God, the stench and the flies must have been extraordinary. So here he calls it George and the Blue Bottles, thinking that when he was making these things, he must be absolutely surrounded by blue bottles. This is one called the White House in Moscow, 1993. Is that white, blue and red? Are those Russian colours? I seem to remember they are. Don't very often see Graham drawing people and faces. He used to say to me, when I asked, well, there are not many people in your work. Yes, there's a person in every one of them. It's you, the viewer. You're always a person in the work. But here you can see how well he could draw the faces and the people if he wanted to do that. And even his technique was so good that he could even cut the letters backwards to print. And there, this extraordinary Minotaur. Again, a lino cut. Sad beast. And here, see again and again the anomaly of the aeroplane. And I used to say, why is that? And he said, look up in the sky. They're everywhere. And here's another one. This one's called Bigfoot. This is in Malta, and I mentioned earlier Graham's love of Malta. And this was an old anchor that had been pulled up in I think when they were dredging just after the Second World War, they pulled up this enormous anchor, which sat in Malta. This was a technique which he used, putting caustic soda on the lino in order to get this lovely effect in here. But look at those wonderful bright colours. I remember once he was being interviewed by an art critic who said, who'd come up from London one of the few times that they bothered to come here, who said to him, Mr. Graham, why the red sky? And we could perhaps look at this. This woodcut over here. Why the red sky? Graham turned to him and without blinking said he'd run out of blue. Here's one of his lithographs, 4-colour lithograph only. It's an extraordinary piece of work, this, of Corfe Castle. I love this print. And I remember sitting with him once. It was actually in Uppingham, and it was middle of winter, and he'd gone out to paint in a field near here. And I thought, it's absolutely freezing cold, so I would go and sit on the windward side of him, try and keep the wind off him while he worked. And I sat there as he painted, and after about half an hour, when I'd been busy with other thoughts, I looked at what he was doing, what he was painting, and I said to him, and I looked at the sky, and I said, my goodness, the sky is purple. Has that just happened? And he said, no, it hasn't just happened. It was purple when we got here. It was just that you were so full of your own thoughts that you didn't see it. And he said to me so often, we don't see what's there, we see what we think is there. And if he shows us anything, it's by looking at his work, it's how to actually look and suspend our judgment and our thought and see what there actually is out there, to see the colour, the barbed wire. There was another occasion when I sat beside him at Avebury. We left early in the morning. I think I had to pick him up at 5 in the morning so that I could apparently stop. We could stop twice so that I could enjoy 2 breakfasts. I always reckoned that he got so excited when we were going to travel somewhere together that he couldn't sleep, so we went very early in the morning. And I sat beside him as he painted one of the stones at Avebury. And I was making a silly attempt to do the same. And then I looked over at what he was doing. And the stone that he was painting had the red in the middle of it. And I looked at his painting, and I looked at the stone, and I thought, where's the red coming from? And I made the mistake of actually saying to him, Rig, did you just make the red up? And he looked at me and he tore a clean sheet of paper from his pad, folded it in half, tore a bit out of it, and then grabbed me and pulled me to the stone. And he took this sheet of paper with a hole in it and he placed it over the stone. And there in the middle, where the hole was, I saw the red. It is extraordinary how difficult it is for us to get ourselves into the state where we do actually see what's there. It's an interesting picture here. This is a monotype, and it's a print, but it's a one-off print where the artist paints sometimes on tin, but usually on glass, and then presses the paper against the glass, takes it away, and the ink, which is used rather than paint, then finds itself onto the paper. Rig made monotypes for years, and in fact he represented Britain in, I think, the Venice Biennale, can't remember exactly what year, alongside Henry Moore, and Rig had monotypes in that exhibition. Here's a monotype which he made in 1993. This was at the top of Skellig Michael, again off the coast of Ireland, and again in the film that Charles Mapleston made, we see Rig climbing the steps to get up to the top of Skellig Michael to make a drawing and to make a watercolour, and then eventually he also made this monotype. Every time I see that bit of film, I think to myself, I want to stop him, he's not going to make it to the top. It's the most extraordinary piece of film. But Rigby Graham would travel anywhere to make a picture. There was one occasion when he went to New York, and I think he came back with 2 pictures only. Another occasion when he went to Iceland, and I think he made 1 watercolour out there. Yeah, the thought of the commercial side was something that didn't matter to him at all. Well, when we worked together, we had numerous exhibitions, and during a show or some other time, I would phone him and say, we've just sold so-and-so. That was always met with surprise. Never once did he ask me how much I got for a picture. He would ask me, good Lord, What sort of person bought that? Why did they buy it? What was it they liked about it? But in terms of how much we got, it was never discussed. Rigby Graham was an extraordinary human being, and I had 30 amazing years working with him. He left us a wonderful body of work, which was all about looking, seeing what was there. It was all about integrity. I hope you've enjoyed this walk round with me.